Hello and welcome to another episode of the This is Bitcoin podcast, where we talk to Bitcoiners about Bitcoin privacy, technology, self-sovereignty, and building Bitcoin businesses. I am your host, Bitcoin Gandalf. My guest today is Josef Tetek, a man who wears many Bitcoin hats. By day, he is a brand ambassador for Trezor and Satoshi Labs. By night, he's a writer and podcaster. Josef has written 2 books published in his native Czech language. They are Enemies of the State, Friends of Freedom, and Bitcoin, Separation of Money from the State. He is a contributor to the BTC Times and Bitcoin Magazine. His podcast, also in Czech, is called Stackuj.cz. He has a background in Austrian Economics, having studied the subject at university in the Czech Republic. In this episode, we talk about Josef's education in Austrian Economics, and Josef summarizes what Austrian Economics is all about, if you're not familiar with it. Josef's journey from crypto to Bitcoin, how the Lightning Network destroyed shitcoin narratives. We talk about whether Bitcoiners leave any room for being wrong about Bitcoin, potential risks facing Bitcoin, and how Josef gets so much done with his podcast, writing, and his day job. In addition, we're going to be donating sats to free open source software Bitcoin projects. And so for this episode, I will donate all the sats streamed to This is Bitcoin podcast via Podcasting 2.0 apps to Josef's chosen project, the BTC Pay server. So if you're listening to this right now and you're not on a Podcasting 2.0 enabled podcasting app, I recommend you turn it off and you go over to one of the Podcasting 2.0 enabled podcast players if you want to support free open source software and you stream some sats. This is going to be done for the entire month after release. So I'll be releasing this today on the 20th of January, and the sats from today until the 19th of February will all be donated to BTC Pay server in Josef's name. Thank you very much, Josef, for coming on the podcast. By the way, this is going to be a part 1 of 2. There was more stuff that we wanted to discuss, so I will have Josef back for a part 2, but I appreciate his time, and I appreciate you all for listening and streaming sats so we can help continue to fund cool FOSS projects. I hope you enjoy. All right. Josef, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I understand you have a background and an interest, potentially before your days of being orange-pilled, in interest in libertarianism or libertarian ideals and Austrian economics. I wanted to actually ask you, well, first of all, how you became interested in those topics, because for me, I didn't even know I don't think I really knew what libertarianism. I might have heard the word before. I don't think I even knew what a libertarian was. And certainly didn't know I'd never heard of Austrian economics before Bitcoin, and I studied economics at university. So how did you hear about these topics, and then how did you become interested in them?
Yeah, so I was a libertarian and Austrian economist a long time before I discovered Bitcoin. And it's basically quite simple because I got it at school. Basically, I got a proper schooling in Austrian School of Economics and the political philosophy of libertarianism. And curiously enough, it was like a state-owned school, like the public education in Czech Republic. There are some good schools, there are some bad schools, but like 12 years ago when I was studying economics, it was still more on the good side, and I just had a good luck of encountering the good teachers at my bachelor's degree. When I was doing my bachelor's degree, I had a curiosity to study economics, and I just had a good luck encountering like a young guy, PhD candidate, who was heavily into Austrian economics and just opened up this whole world to me. Then I switched school, went to University of Economics in Prague, and the faculty of economic policy was heavily dominated by Austrians, like Czechs by nationality, but Austrian economists by their passion and profession. So in those years, it was 2009, 2002, 2011. I studied 2 years under probably one of the best Austrian economists in Europe, maybe in the world. Some of them, like there's Mises Institute in US, like a big mecca of Austrian economists today, and then there was this faculty of economic policy at Czech University of Economics. Sadly, the faculty was basically dissolved several years after that. It still functions, but the Austrian economics doesn't get any love anymore in there. But while I was there, I was able to study under the professor Shima, who coordinated translations of like Mises's Human Action, Mario Rothbar's Principles of Economics, and like other major works like that. And my like diploma was on public goods and the private provision of public goods. So just years before I found out about Bitcoin, in like 2009, 2010, I was like heavily leaning towards basically what we would call anarcho-capitalism. And should I go with how I found Bitcoin then, or is that
well,
like
no, I have a couple of questions actually about some of the specifics and just some observations and stuff that I wonder if you can give me some insights on, because one of the things that's really striking is, so you mentioned that you were taught Austrian economics at school, and you said it was a state school. So is that referring to like a secondary school when you're like a teenager until you go to university?
No, it was a university. It was public university. Yeah.
Got it. So public university. I mean, but that's still pretty remarkable, given that I would say 99% of universities are not teaching Austrian economics. I mean, I went to a university in the UK and I studied economics, and I don't think the word Austrian economics was mentioned once ever. And the other thing I found interesting, well, I wonder, like, which we can get into in a little bit, but how it might have been just a coincidence that, specific professors in Czech Republic were there, and so they created an environment where they could teach Austrian economics. But it strikes me as if like the Austrian economists are very passionate and like strong advocates for Austrian economics, whereas the Keynesian economists and my professors of economics, they don't care about Keynesian economics. It's just the way they were taught that this is the economic theory, it's Keynesian, and so they pass it on. But they're not like strong believers like this is the way the world should work, etc. And why do you think that is? Why do you think that Austrians seem to be very, very passionate about Austrian economics, and the Keynesians are just kind of like regurgitating what they were taught is the way?
Yeah, I totally agree that Austrian economists are always quite passionate, even in the academia, which sort of sucks life out of everybody. But the teachers I met and like the professors and the PhD candidates were always quite passionate about Austrian economics and libertarianism, which usually goes hand in hand. And this attracted me to studying under these teachers, because what the school basically never did to me is like destroy my passion for finding out the truth, which happens to many people after going through the whole schooling process. So I'm really glad it didn't happen with me, and I'm trying to do the same for my kids. But back to your question, why that is the case, I guess just because it's not a mainstream and you sort of have to find it out for yourself. And since it's not mainstream, if somebody tries to explain economics to you in this way, like in a Misesian, Rothbardian way, you sort of have to confront it with what you hear everywhere else and what you have been taught up to this point, because nobody usually is brought up as Austrian economist, and usually through elementary and high school and media, you are given this picture of, as you say, Keynesian economics. So it checks your critical thinking skills, and if you pass through, you basically become passionate. And it's quite similar with Bitcoin and Bitcoiners, because you have this mainstream picture all around you, and if you step out of it, you just have to spread the message to everybody else. And like the personal profile of Austrian economists and Bitcoiners is quite similar. Like, these are some of the most passionate advocates around. And I've seen similar profiles, for example, in carnivorism, like in the special type of diet kind of people, the carnivore diet or the keto diet. These are also people like who like to spread the message. And you can also, of course, see it with vegans, for example. If somebody believes in something that's not mainstream, they usually do more of their own research, more of their own thinking, and then they try to convince of what they think is true their friends, their family, and such.
Yeah, that's a fantastic answer. I think like the main thing I took away from that is that because it's not the mainstream view, you're forced, like you're being told sort of about an alternative potential reality, and you have to exercise your critical thinking skills to sort of like match that with what you're observing in the world and what else you're told, rather than just like zombie absorb something you're told and taking it at face value. And then obviously if you discover that this other thing that's perhaps not taught or not so obvious is actually seems to be like either it works or you can now see the world in a different way and it fits what you've just been told about how things function. Obviously once you believe that's the truth, you're more likely to passionately advocate for it, particularly if it's like a contrarian view, because everyone else is not seeing the same thing as you. So there's scope to try. You want to have discussions and try and make people see what you're seeing and help them see a different. But yeah, I think the critical thinking, the way that it forces you to think critically is a key thing that you don't get if you just absorb what you're being told and taking it at face value. And sadly, the default isn't being taught Austrian economics, it's being taught Keynesian economics. I mean, and we can go down like a really deep wormhole or a rabbit hole of why it's Keynesian and like all the potentially perverse incentives about why you would be taught that versus Austrian. But I think we'll save that for another time. But I do want to know, just because I want to go and do some research, and also just for the listeners. So was it the professor you mentioned? His name is Shima?
Yes, Josef Shima. I can probably send the correct spelling because it has a lot of Czech characters.
Oh, okay, cool. It's not like Shima.
No.
Okay, got it. And then so let's say I have Human Action. It's like a huge, thick Bible. So, but are there any other books that you would recommend to somebody that wants to learn more about Austrian economics?
Yeah, Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt. That's quite a thin book. It's a short read and very, very readable. And I'm just trying to find out Murray Rothbard, he was like a pupil of Ludwig von Mises, and he sort of rewrote Human Action into a more readable form. And I know how it's called in Czech, but I just have to find how it's called in English. So it's Man, Economy and State, but I guess that's just a part of the book. Yeah, Power and Market. It's Man, Economy and State and Power and Market.
Awesome.
And sometimes it's published as one book because Rothbard wrote it as a single book. It's also has like 800 pages, but it's much more readable, comes with examples, and reads more like a textbook. So I like that one, Man, Economy and State and Power and Market. And it also goes deeply into like the market, the incentives of the market, and the functioning of the market versus how the power structures work and how the state intervenes in the market and what kind of problems it causes.
Excellent. And then, so if you could, and I know this might be difficult, so I'm asking a lot, but if you could summarize what Austrian economics is about in as brief a manner as possible, just to give people who have no idea what it is, have never heard about it before, just a sort of a glimpse into what it's about, how would you describe it?
Yeah, that's a major task.
It doesn't have to be like all encompass. You don't have to obviously like cover everything, but like if you just had to like condense the one message about it or one thing you wanted to share about what it's about, how would you do it?
Sure.
If you can?
I'll try.
Yeah.
So for me, the basic message of Austrian School of Economics is individual acts, and both of these terms are quite important. It's individuals who do the purposeful action, who basically live their life, work, interact with other people. It's individuals. It's not companies. It's not nation states. It's not some bureaucracies, because all of these institutions are made up of individuals who have their own motives, face some kind of incentives, and everybody just tries to make himself better off. And acting, like individual acts, that refers to like the purposeful behavior. That's how Mises defines it. Acting is a purposeful behavior. And this just means people do things because they believe it will make them or stuff they care about better off in the end. And it's quite subjective. Like how people act is usually based, or economically speaking, it's based on their subjective preferences. So all acting is basically rational if we understand it subjectively. It can be irrational if considered with some other information that we have suddenly. But from the point of the individual, whatever he does, it's a purposeful behavior because the individual wants and aims to fulfill some of his subjective preferences. And we can explain quite a lot this way. We can explain the business cycles, we can explain why welfare basically doesn't work, why like stuff like minimum wage doesn't work, why people get addicted, for example, and why it's hard to break from addiction. So this is like the most basic explanation of Austrian economics. Individuals act, but even in these two terms, there's a lot that basically deviates from, for example, Keynesianism and the mainstream school of thought. And there are other interesting concepts of Austrian School of Economics, like time preferences and how it affects interest rates and our behavior in time. And of course, for example, Seyfedin Amus works with this concept quite a lot in his Bitcoin standard, because with time preferences we can explain what's the problem with manipulating interest rates and why having like a neutral monetary standard like Bitcoin, why it matters so much. So yeah, go on.
Then I was going to say that's a great, that the fact that you pretty much summarized it in 2 words and then explained what each of those means is awesome. I thought that's a great condensation of what it is. And just correct me if I'm wrong, but just the couple of things that I took away from that. It sounds like almost like it's psychology, a lot of it. I don't know if that's just my impression or whether that's something that you would, because if you're saying that action is subjective per the preference of the person, that's essentially like you're psychoanalyzing a person to figure out, what they care about, and then derive or understand why they took a certain action. And I would almost say maybe there's no like good or bad in that sense, because if you just look at like this person did this because they're trying to feed their child,
Yeah.
you take away an element of moral judgment or like objective good bad. There's just like action reason,
Sure.
or action incentive, right?
Yeah, I would say the difference between economics and psychology is economists just take the subjectivity of acting as a given, and economists don't try to explain the motivations. Like they don't try to understand why somebody is, for example, subject to addiction. They just understand it as something that we have to work with, and
like it's a reality that happens, but we don't need to analyze why someone is addicted.
Yeah, that's right. And for example, it's a reality that if you raise the minimum wage, you will cause unemployment, and you don't necessarily go into like the motivations of of the individuals there. You just understand that some actions cause disruptions in the incentive structures, and since people tend to follow their subjective preferences, some result will basically happen. And you got a good point about economics not necessarily saying anything about morality or ethics, and if you go back to, for example, Adam Smith and like these 18th century economists, they used to be moral philosophers as well. Like Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations, but he wrote a treatise on morality as well. And we can see the similar with Mises or Rothbard, where Mises wrote a treatise on economics, and besides that he wrote like a political philosophy treatise like liberalism or socialism and his other works. And Murray Rothbard wrote The Ethics of Liberty, in which some people tend to criticize economics for being like value free, where we would like to sort of take away the welfare from the people and we have a cold heart or something. But that's just the nature of economics. Like economics should be value free. You have these like basic understandings of human nature, of the subjectivity of preferences, of individual methodology, like individuals' acts, and you don't go into like whether something is good or bad. You just analyze the causes and the effects. But you can do the analysis of morality or ethics if you like step out of the economist's shoes and step into like philosopher's shoes, like Murray Rothbard does in his Ethics of Liberty. And of course, when Murray wrote about ethics, he like uses the apparatus of like economics, of Austrian economics, and just arrives at similar conclusions as the economist does. That not only is it more efficient to be free, to not have the state intervene into the market, but it's even just, moral, and more aligned with like civility of mankind to do so.
Cool. Awesome. All right. That's a great bit on Austrian economics and a little bit on libertarianism. So thank you for that. And I will check out that book that you mentioned, the Economics in One Lesson, right? Yeah, that sounds like a good one. And I think those Rothbard ones, perhaps maybe a good reading before I jump into human action as a last one or more advanced book, right?
Yeah. Like I have never read Human Action page cover to cover. I have it on my shelf as a sort of referential book, and I'll always just check out what Mises writes on the nature of like price regulation and such. It's a great book for that.
Nice, like just referencing whenever you need a specific knowledge on a given topic. Fantastic. All right, let's jump into Bitcoin then. So I mentioned, well, before we started recording, I mentioned that I watched your appearance on the Bit Refill podcast, and you talked a little bit about how you got into Bitcoin, then into crypto, and then back into Bitcoin. Now, the area I'm really interested in is why you went to crypto, and then why you jumped back to Bitcoin after that. If telling the story of how you got into Bitcoin helps us to understand, or for you to explain the jump to crypto and back, then feel free to tell it again. But otherwise, I understand it was like you listened to Andreas Antonopoulos give a talk or something, and that got you hooked on. You'd heard of Bitcoin before though, but like an Andreas Antonopoulos talk in 2016 really got you going down the rabbit hole. But the bit I really want to focus on that I think is really important, and I personally I get annoyed that this happens, is that I feel like the mainstream view or the mainstream understanding is that Bitcoin and crypto are the same thing, and they're almost like you can use those two terms interchangeably. Like you'll often get people asking you, someone who doesn't understand cryptocurrencies or Bitcoin, but they just want to invest and make some money, so they ask you about Bitcoin, and then you tell them about, specifically you're talking about Bitcoin, and then they come back to you and they say, oh, I bought some Doge, thinking it's just like Bitcoin but a different name, or just thinking like it's all companies, they're all different stocks, and you just buy either Microsoft or Google. It's kind of the same thing, but it's just a different company. So I want to try and help people understand the difference between crypto and Bitcoin, and I wonder if your journey into crypto and then back to Bitcoin is a way to sort of illustrate that difference.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was just pure gambling mentality and speculation, and I just wanted to not necessarily make more Bitcoin, but just make more money. Mm-hmm. I'm perfectly willing to admit I didn't understand Bitcoin or even money itself properly back then, like in 2015 to maybe 2017, when I was still into shitcoins. How I got back into Bitcoin only was quite a long journey and quite painful one, because I lost quite a lot of Bitcoin in the process, on shitcoins of course, and even on like leverage trading and such. So I'm completely understanding when people do it today. But that said, I believe the resources right now for newcomers are of much higher quality, more ubiquitous, like there's much more of them, more understandable, more straightforward. We have people like Michael Saylor, like Seyfedin, Breedlove, Marty Band, who are able to explain the nature of money and the nature of Bitcoin versus crypto in a very approachable terms. Back then, there was Andreas, but Andreas started to shitcoin as well. So I sort of followed him there, and I paid a huge price for that. But I'm quite glad I went through this journey, because as I did so, I had a skin in the game all the way. Like when I was talking about shitcoins to people, I truly believed it, I truly held it. When I started to write a book about why Bitcoin only matters and started to do some lectures and run a podcast about Bitcoin only. I switched back and lost a lot of potential Bitcoin in the process, but good for me I did so when I did, because I could lose it all if I waited for a longer time. So I'm not really sure if there's like a clear-cut argument for newcomers who have no conception of how economy works, what is economics, how money works, and just go straight for Bitcoin, because they are going to be lured by this like fiat mindset. They can make more short-term dollars on some shitcoin, on some NFT, and it can work out for them in a short while, but they are going to lose the most precious thing in the long run, like sats, as many Bitcoin as they could have, because if they focus just on having the Bitcoin, the dollar gains, they totally miss like what it's all about, and it's all about having as many Bitcoin as possible, like from the personal financial perspective. So I believe the educational level is getting much higher as we go by, and the past bear market, like since 2018 till 2020, played a huge role in that. Like basically all the major podcasts started to record in this time. All the seminal books and works like VJ's bullish case for Bitcoin, like Seyfedin, like Layered Money, all of this started to come out only in this bear market, in the past bear market. And now when newcomers come around, they have this at their fingertips, and they don't necessarily have to make the same mistakes as I and many others did, because it's much more clearly explained. Even in like infographics form, there are several Twitter accounts that do like Bitcoin infographics, and this communicates the message quite strongly.
Yeah, I completely agree that the level. So, I owned Bitcoin for the first time in 2019, but purely I'd heard of it in 2016 or 17, probably before. But 2017 is when I started paying attention. But I was the blockchain, not Bitcoin guy, and it's a tulip mania bubble. And then when the 2017 market ended, I was like, oh, I'm vindicated. I was right. But I kept an eye on it. And when it went back to 10K, I was like, okay, there must be something here that I'm not getting, because, you know, I'm not right. It's gone back up to 10K.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's when I bought some.
Yeah. I was never like a blockchain guy. I always like understood this is bullshit, and Andreas also always mentioned that blockchain is bullshit. I was more into the idea that we could have multiple currencies, and that Bitcoin doesn't scale very well, and Litecoin basically helps out in this regard, and like coins that are basically copies of Bitcoin could be like synergic with Bitcoin. And then Lightning Network started to develop after 2018. So this basically destroyed this narrative. And since like 2019, I started to suspect something is wrong with the multi-coin vision. And I basically convinced myself finally in 2020 when I started to write my own book. And this book, it's called like Bitcoin, the Separation of Money and State, but it came out only in Czech. It's published by Brains. And this book served mostly to convince myself than to convince anybody else. Because after I came out of the process, I just saw nothing really makes sense but Bitcoin. And not just in the sense of like the crypto industry, but like the libertarian strategy for bringing more liberty to this world. Nothing makes more sense than Bitcoin. This is what I concluded from the process of writing this book.
Do you think that part of that is the fact that like Bitcoin is truly decentralized and immutable, and there isn't like the ability for one person or like a central entity to take full control of it, like some other cryptocurrencies?
Yeah, that's a good definition of what Bitcoin basically is. It doesn't matter like how Bitcoin works on a technical level. What matters is like why we should care, and why we should care is because it's immutable and there is no one in charge, and it's dynamic. It relies on the incentives, not on some like statutes and laws. So yeah, this is why Bitcoin matters. And like since I'm a non-technical guy, I always try to understand why any of this matters, why Bitcoin and the crypto should actually matter for me and for mankind. And the only conclusion I was able to get at is that only Bitcoin matters because it's really quite different from what we had in the history and what we have right now with like fiat currencies or altcoins, because no one is in charge, and it's basically anti-fragile because it can just readjust itself through its users and through their incentives and through their subjective preferences, which are of course to preserve their purchasing value and such.
Yeah, I mean, I think you make some excellent points earlier when you started on this, explaining to us or telling us your story, and the sort of why people get into shitcoins and why newcomers may not understand Bitcoin, the profundity of Bitcoin right away. And I think one of the key things, as you said, is like if you don't understand what money is, and if you don't know like the ins and outs of what a fiat currency is and a little bit how central banking works, I can see how you're just trying to make more dollars, right? So you go for the one that you think is going to go up the most in fiat. Whereas I think Bitcoiners are already seeing the end game with fiat is that all fiat currencies inflate to infinity and collapse over or most of them over a long enough time frame. And so we don't want to short-term get that. We have low time preference. We don't want the gains in fiat. We think of everything in Bitcoin terms. We use Bitcoin as our unit of account, and we're betting on a future where the best money wins, because we might understand from history that can be the case. Whereas people just think like, oh, I want more dollars, so I'm rich if I have more dollars, right?
Yeah, that's right. Like one of the defining characteristics of Bitcoiners is probably they have no faith in fiat currencies anymore. And I don't necessarily have to buy any more Bitcoin because I won't get like percentage wise, I won't get as much. Like it doesn't make any more. It doesn't matter anymore. Like in my net worth, if I buy any more Bitcoin with my earnings. But what I'm doing when I'm like invoicing in Bitcoin and earning sats through my sales and such, and buying Bitcoin occasionally as well, is I'm just preserving my purchasing power. When I exchange my time for some money, I want that time to be as valuable as possible, as long as possible, and fiat currencies just don't preserve that purchasing power. So it doesn't matter if I have like X amount of Bitcoin and now I buy like 0.1% each month, because it seems like a tiny amount, but what matters is valuing myself and my work and preserving that value.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think one of the other fallacies because I think you mentioned, I don't know if you just mentioned about like what your belief why other cryptocurrencies would coexist. You believed in like a multi cryptocurrency future because you thought there would be just other uses, or there would be synergies between Bitcoin and other coins because of scaling issues or whatever it is. One of the other things I find, and I don't know, I'm curious to get your take on it. I think there is also, I don't know if it's a fallacy or a whatever psychological term you might want to use, but there's people are trying to chase something different because they think they're too late for Bitcoin, and they want to find the one that's going to be the next Bitcoin so they can make the gains that they would have made if they have gotten into Bitcoin before, which is entirely missing the point of Bitcoin in the first place, because again, it's just still thinking about making more dollars. But there's this fallacy that's like, and then they also become tribal about the one they pick. So it's like almost like supporting sometimes I think about it like we're all supporting different sports teams, and then it's like loyalty to the team is almost more important than the fundamentals of that particular project and whether it's going to work or not or have utility in the market. What do you think about that?
Yeah. Once again, I completely agree and can sympathize because I went through that with my heavy shitcoin bags, and it's quite hard to agree you made some mistake, which you are not basically, which you will not be able to come back from unscathed, because for example, if you bought the top of some shitcoins and it's now minus 80%, that's just the nature of human psychology. You are going to double down, and you don't want to hear the truth because it's too painful for you to admit you've been so wrong. And yeah, it's basically the same kind of psychological pattern as when somebody is addicted to some drugs or alcohol and they just don't want to admit they are doing something wrong to themselves because it's too painful to face yourself and to admit you can be so wrong on such a profound level. So like the most successful investors all around, not just pertaining to Bitcoin, learn to step away from their emotions and to just take the truth at face value and to just basically like grok it, like understand it on a fundamental level, even if it destroys some of your biases, even if it makes you feel like stupid, right? And this is why I said it's not that easy for newcomers not to be lured by shitcoins, because if you drive on this emotional level and you are bombarded by the sleek marketing of shitcoins and you listen to people you respect highly like Elon Musk, and everybody tells you like shitcoins are cool and you should go for NFTs, and these Bitcoin maxi guys are just don't want you to get rich and such. This all aims at your emotions, and in order to understand Bitcoin, and it's quite similar like libertarianism versus socialism. Bitcoiners and libertarians usually aim for the rational side of people, whereas socialists and shitcoiners usually aim for like the emotional side and like one's self-perception and such. But once again, I believe this is changing a bit with Michael Saylor, with what's happening in El Salvador. These are suddenly like events and developments that are cool, like it seems cool. And Jack Mallers is a very cool kid. When he explains Bitcoin, he can be very emotional, as we've seen in Miami. So this is changing a bit. It's not just like nerds and Austrian economists and libertarians trying to explain why Bitcoin matters on a rational level, but we have like also a cool, so even sort of like a propaganda, like Lucio Poletti, if you know Lucio Poletti, the Bitcoin artist. He basically does like a Bitcoin propaganda, and that's quite powerful, and we definitely need that.
Yeah.
But I probably veered off the question. I don't even know what.
No, that's okay. That's okay. But so what I think what I was going to ask you about that is because we're saying like the other cryptocurrencies, they appeal to this emotional side of you, and then but I do feel like a lot of Bitcoiners are also very emotional about Bitcoin. They're not just like, although I know I would agree that most in general, like the stereotypical Bitcoin maxi or like Bitcoin maximalist would have spent a lot of time understanding a lot of the things that you need to be as convicted as you are in Bitcoin from a more rational level of understanding money, incentives, economics, whereas a crypto person who's going for Doge is more emotional, like they just love Doge or they love the community or some like emotional aspect. But I wonder, like, is there room that do Bitcoiners leave any room for themselves to be wrong? And I know it's hard because I'm now lumping everyone in the same basket as Bitcoiners, but maybe I can ask you, like, do you leave any room for you to be wrong about Bitcoin? I ask myself this all the time. Should I have, another investment, or should I be hedging a little bit in case like Ethereum does actually become better than Bitcoin or something? I don't believe that. I'm not hedging myself with shitcoins, but I do ask myself that constantly just to double check that to not be like just 100% convinced without checking. Yeah,
that's a great question, and I can only answer from my point of view, of course.
Yeah.
So since I've been wrong on the nature of money basically 2 times in my life. First was like gold and silver, when I was like a gold and silver bug. That was like during my school days when I studied Austrian Economics, and Mario Rothbard always goes on about how we should return to the gold standard, and many other Austrian economists as well. So I strongly believed that we are going back to gold standard, and I should basically hedge my fiat with gold and silver coins. That was wrong, obviously. Then the second time I was wrong was with shitcoins and with the multi-coin nature of like future monetary system. So I like to believe I am more skeptical minded now and more critical minded, and I'm quite willing to discuss Bitcoin shortcomings with people who understand these shortcomings and not just some strawman. For example, on one of my recent podcasts, I had like one of the best Bitcoin developers I know. He's a Slovakian guy. He actually came up with the idea for turbo channels. So he's quite proficient, and we discussed for about an hour like what could go wrong with Bitcoin. And let me mention several things that could go wrong with Bitcoin. First is there's basically a bug overflow problem in Bitcoin, and we need a hard fork before 2108. That's a nice fact that not that many people are aware of, but that's a problem. We need a hard fork in Bitcoin. And
is that you said it for sorry to interrupt you, for a bug overflow issue?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. You can find it if you Google like 2108 bug overflow Bitcoin. It's been covered quite extensively, but not much attention to that. Another issue is, of course, the security budget, and as the Bitcoin subsidy tapers, will we have sufficient fees? And like the past year has been quite alarming from this regard, because like the fees are negligible I can still send 1 set per byte transaction, I'm happy to do so, of course, on a personal level. But I'm quite worried about having a sufficient security budget, as we have 2 or more 3 Bitcoin halvings.
Sorry, can I interrupt you just to elaborate on that point? Because I think this is potentially what I'm about to say is potentially a taboo subject that's not many Bitcoin, it'll be considered sacrilege if it's suggested as a potential, because I agree that this is I'm not saying it's definitely an issue, but it's definitely something to keep and to consider. Whereas I think Bitcoin's issuance schedule, the fact that it's fixed and it's predictable in the future forever, and that it's only going to be 21 million coins, is it's one of the biggest selling points of Bitcoin. So people tiptoe or just avoid this security fees issue. I personally believe that there is a chance, and I'm not saying it's the right choice, but there is a case to be made for potentially some adjustment in the issuance to fix this problem. That's the only way I can think about it, unless there's we are then manipulating fees to be higher, which again, it'd be we would be messing with the market rather than leaving it to be a free market. So I don't know, how do you see that?
Yeah, I believe within 2 or 3 halvings we will see proposals for change to the issuance schedule and maybe to have a perpetual issuance. But it's never going to happen in Bitcoin. We couldn't raise the block size limit in 2017, or I was not in favor, but those who wanted to raise this limit, New York Agreement and SegWit 2x, they weren't able to push this through and only created another shitcoin in the form of Bcash. And that was much less critical to what Bitcoin is than the 21 million limit. So even though these proposals are going to be proposed, it's not going to happen. And the only thing that's going to happen is another shitcoin will be created. If Bitcoin is unable to generate a sufficient security budget, it will first die, then it will readjust its monetary policy. That's what I believe.
You think so? Because where my mind went is I understand that as long as it's observed to be working well enough, it's easy. I think it's easier when it's the top market cap and it's the most well-known coin and it's got these other special qualities. But if the security issue became critical to the point where the protocol isn't functioning properly or it's being attacked, then surely the incentives would say you have to do something to change it. Whilst it's working, it makes sense, right? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. But I do believe that stance might change, because why wouldn't you defend something when it's clearly just not working or broken anymore? I know ahead of time it's hard to say, oh, it's going to break, in 5 years, we should act now. I think it's something catastrophic might happen and then it changes.
Yeah.
And like you say, that might be a death.
Yeah. What I believe is much more probably that would happen in such a case is the protocol subsidy would be supplemented by an outright subsidy of companies that work in Bitcoin, that MicroStrategy, for example, and they companies like these would simply send out transactions with enormous fees, like $1 transaction with $10,000 fee, just to subsidize the miners. That's the most straightforward thing that could happen without alternating the monetary policy, without setting the precedent for making such a change that would basically destroy Bitcoin. So
you could make an argument, though, that then the network becomes more centralized because it's reliant on a certain action by a certain group of people, even though it's a voluntary action to sustain the network, and they could use that leverage to make changes that the nodes don't agree with. They say, well, you don't agree with this, then we're not doing this anymore, and then the network gets attacked. Right? That would be, I guess, one of the downsides. Although I understand that's definitely a possibility. That, like, yeah, seeing some, I guess, grassroots sort of almost donation style. But I mean, you don't even have to think of it as a donation, because if you're benefiting from Bitcoin and it requires something to remain usable and secure, it shouldn't be an issue that you have to spend some, the expectation that it should be like cost you nothing and be this amazing tool. Like maybe there's in 50, 75 years, we're all running a mini nuclear reactor at home for our electricity, and we can all run a miner at very low cost, and the network is secure, and you can make, a tiny fraction of fees, and it's all good. I don't know. That could be a future. I hope we have nuclear nuclear reactors at home that power our homes, and we don't rely on the grid anymore, right?
Yeah, I hope so as well. I'm a big subscriber to Marty Band's view on energy sector and So
you could even say that maybe Bitcoin will incentivize the creation of that sort of. You might get like a Elon Musk of energy, because he's a Bitcoiner. He realizes this is an issue, and that like sovereign energy production that's cheap and easy to do at home, like a mini nuclear reactor. I don't know how easy that isn't technically, right? But you could we didn't think that we could build reusable rockets, and then Elon Musk in a decade does it. So, you could see a similar thing happen, and then it fixes Bitcoin without touching the protocol itself.
But I don't think we have to adjust the protocol or rely on like the charity of the biggest stakeholders. I believe what's eventually going to happen is these like second and third layers on top of Bitcoin will take off like big time. And since we will have this like economic aggregation of our transactions, it won't be a problem to pay like $100 or $1,000 fees on the base layer, and it will be sufficiently filled with transactions so that this kind of fee market develops. And back to economics, this is sometimes called, and Bitcoiners cite it often, the Jevons paradox, where if some kind of good or commodity becomes more efficient, it's in higher demand as a result, because you can do more stuff with it. And the block space is the commodity we are talking about, and we need to pay for this block space, and we are worried about not enough people paying not enough money for this commodity. But it's going to happen because we will have these further layers on top of Bitcoin, which will greatly expand the possibilities we can actually do with this block space.
Do you think, and by the way, I'm just like thinking out loud here, so I could be completely off, but do you think like having central entities on top of Bitcoin that are just, like when you use Chivo wallet, if somebody is sending Bitcoin from one Chivo wallet to another Chivo wallet, it's actually potentially just a database entry change rather than an on-chain transaction. Could the same be said for like a Coinbase buy, where the coins are already held by a Coinbase seller and it's a Coinbase buyer and they're staying in Coinbase custody? Do you think that's also something where they don't move the coins on chain? They just change the spreadsheet in Coinbase and assign the coins to the new user, and it's only if they withdraw away from Coinbase that there's an on-chain transaction. So there might be a lot of like actual Bitcoin transactions, but not actually happening on chain.
These kind of institutions act like Bitcoin banks, where all the transactions are happening just on the internal ledger and nothing's happening on Bitcoin. And like there are strong security and privacy trade-offs with doing this. And Hal Finney's idea in like 2010 or 11 was that we will need these kind of Bitcoin banks, like these exchanges where we just readjust the internal ledgers, because Bitcoin itself won't scale, And luckily enough, Taj Draija and Joseph Poon came up with the Lightning Network, and we don't need these institutions. Like Lightning Network does what these like Bitcoin banks should be doing, but without such strong privacy and security trade-offs.
Yeah, and I guess the Lightning Network, if a centralized entity or several centralized entities become the majority of transactions, they might interact with the chain rarely to never, whereas like Lightning, you're always opening, closing channels, so you are having some interactions with the base chain. What I was gonna say, actually, like just a thought I had is like, I guess the incentive structure and the economics of the Bitcoin blockchain are designed with Bitcoin being a peer-to-peer money. So if you're no longer like acting peer-to-peer, as in you're acting like peer to central entity that sits on top of Bitcoin to another peer and never touching the base layer, then you're kind of breaking the protocol in a way, because that's not how it was designed to be used.
Well, it's totally permissionless, so everybody can use it in a way they seem fit. But like people should realize, if they have their Bitcoin lying on Coinbase, they don't get the benefits from Bitcoin. They don't like, they may get some price exposure, but who knows? Because if they keep it on there for several years, they might lose it altogether, or it might get taxed into oblivion.
Or so 6102.
Get confiscated. That's
Agreed.
Right.
Agreed.
So, like, it's not your Bitcoin if you hold it on an exchange.
Honestly, if I was gonna like hammer away one of those points, it would be that if you're doing that, you're not getting the best things that Bitcoin has to offer. You're leaving a lot of value of Bitcoin on the table, basically just you're there for fiat gains, which could disappear because you're not using Bitcoin I guess how you can get the most value out of using it, which is like storing it by yourself, holding your own keys, and just trying to be as self-sovereign and as private as possible, especially because it's a semi-adversarial money at the moment. So I saw someone tweet that we might be entering the like now, first they ignore you and then they laughed at you, and now we might be entering the they fight you stage. And you have to be prepared for the fight. You can't assume it's not going to happen and it's just going to be like a rosy path to hyper-Bitcoinization. I think holding your own keys is one of the best preparations to the they fight you stage, because you have the leverage. They can't take it from you. Whereas if you're storing it, Coinbase is going to do whatever the government tells them. They've made it clear they don't really care about Bitcoin.
Like one of my pet conspiracy theories is Brian Armstrong becoming the Secretary of Finance for the US.
Love it.
In exchange for handing over the keys to users' Bitcoin. And
I mean, imagine
how many Bitcoin does Coinbase hold? It's like 1 million.
I don't know, but it must be a lot. They apparently, this is all speculation, but I know Michael Saylor, MicroStrategy, used Coinbase to acquire their Bitcoin, and we know from the last time Michael Saylor mentioned it could have changed since then, that they are using a custodian. So, and Coinbase has a separate custodial entity for institutional grade custodial entity. So his coins could be on there. Who knows? But that's 130,000 coins, just one person. So I imagine Coinbase probably has at least 1 million coins.
Yeah, it used to be million in like January 2020 before Michael Saylor started to acquire. But like people should realize the state doesn't play fair. And if there's a crisis of sufficient level, anything could happen, literally anything. And we have seen this like in 1933 with the confiscations of US citizens' gold. And we have seen this in the past 2 years with the COVID hysteria, where there's no rule of law anymore. The government just adjusts. Like in Czech Republic, it's quite humorous actually, because time and time again, a lot of the emergency orders were found to be unconstitutional or against the regular law. And the answer was always, but it's a crisis, it was necessary, and we will prepare the correct laws right now. And the Constitutional Court gives them 7 days to do so. So there's actually not such a separation of powers, because the Constitutional Court plays with the government. If they find out they haven't been doing stuff legally, they give them enough time to repair that. And citizens who were fined for being outside after 9 p.m. when there was curfew, they still were fined, and nobody gave the money back. Yeah. So there is no rule of law in and Czech Republic is quite advanced democracy, for 30 years now. And of course, I'm not even mentioning what's happening in Austria and such.
Exactly. I mean, it's pretty similar flavor everywhere in the world. So it's not like we can say, oh, it's an individual failure of this particular country. It seems to be what is it? Mass hysteria. What's the what everyone was tweeting recently? Mass hysteria, psychosis.
Mass formation.
Yeah, I mean, you made a good point. They say, oh, it's an emergency. So I watched. I was watching. Somebody had the news on, and there was reporters were asking about what just the general public walking on the street, what they thought about vaccine mandates, and everyone was pretty much I don't think they're good, but it's an emergency, so it's okay. So I think most people, if they weren't sold this oh, it's a very dangerous disease and it's a pandemic, it's an emergency and we have to take extraordinary measures, nobody would be for these things. So if you could just take away the sense of this, the fear, I guess, right? Because it's a fear. If you took away the fear from people, then they would be able to think more rationally, or at least see some of the big cons of trying to mandate this sort of stuff. And one thing I was going to ask you, I know we scheduled 10 to 11:30, and there's so many wormholes we could go down, and I really want to talk to you about Trezor as well. I mean, all of this stuff is really interesting. I'm sure we could talk for 3 hours, but I want to make sure that you don't have anything scheduled, or if you can let me know when you have a hard stop, just so I can also make sure we talk about Trezor.
I don't have anything scheduled, so
okay.
I'm fine. Yeah,
cool.
I enjoyed the discussion. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. I mean, yesterday I spoke to my my best friend. I moved recently, so my best friend is still the country where I used to live, and we hadn't caught up in a while. And we had a 3-hour rant about Bitcoin and what's going on with governments. Because so I used to live in Hong Kong, and Hong Kong has crazy restrictions. They ban travel from different countries. Even if you're a Hong Kong citizen or resident, if you're in a country that they decide you can't come back from, you can't go back from that country. You have no right to re-enter your own country. Or if you do, you have to spend 21 days in quarantine in a hotel that you have to pay for yourself. There's all sorts of close contact stuff where you get sent to quarantine. If you're had dinner with someone who tests positive within the next 3 weeks, you get sent to a government quarantine. There's just crazy shit. So I'm very much I don't think I was super skeptical and of authority and government. I think I was sort of oh, it's the best system we have and blah 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 blah. But now since Bitcoin, I am very leaning towards anarchism, libertarianism. I think there has to be some I don't think society and humans function without some level of trusting each other, because imagine, I can't build my own computers and do everything myself and be a plumber and a carpenter and a house builder and everything. So we have to trust each other to a certain level. But I think the incentives of the state are such that they can only ever grow bigger. They cannot reduce down to a size that would be optimal, let's call it.
Yeah. Anarchism isn't solipsism. anarchists don't think like first anarchists don't think people are like all good, and there are bad people around, of course. And anarchists, like anarcho-capitalists, of course, believe in the division of labor and cooperation. And like where like statists and anarchists differ is in their understanding of the incentive structures of the state and of the society that isn't intervened in by the state. And there are many examples, like in daily life, where you don't actually cooperate with people or don't harm any people just because you could be jailed or just because there's a cop around the corner, because you can actually get away with many things, even like in countries like United States or Britain. You can get away with many things, but you are not going to do these things usually because from the long-term perspective it's more advantageous to cooperate and not to be a shitty person. And a big part of that is, of course, morality and ethics. And I'm not a religious person, but I sort of agree with like religious people that there's a huge part missing there, that ethics and morality don't get taught today, and a lot of parents have their moral values quite screwed up. So and you know, it sort of gets back to Bitcoin because I believe Bitcoin actually made me a more moral and ethical person. And when I found out shitcoins are basically scams, I just needed to communicate that, like in my book, in my writings, in my speeches, because I just believe it's my like moral imperative to do so and to warn people from doing the same mistakes.
Yeah. I mean, I see loads of parallels. You know, you said shitcoins are scams, which is a great phrase. But I see lots of. So I used to work in real estate, and I also like started listening to the Tim Ferriss podcast in 2015. And of course, he's like, at the time, he's like heavily into venture capital investing and investing in startups, and like Uber and Airbnb and blah, blah, blah were like all the cool things, right? And then I saw lots of startups trying to like disrupt the real estate industry. And being, you know, working in real estate, I knew that everything they were saying about what they were going to build is just complete bullshit. It was like, you know, a banker who had a terrible time finding an apartment and then thought he could do a better job and fix the industry. So he was going to start the Airbnb for long-term rentals or the Uber for real estate agents or whatever. And it's always like, you haven't worked in real estate. You have no idea how it works. And so I was very attuned to marketing promises. Like, you can have really slick, this is what I'm going to deliver in the future, but, you know, fund my company now or use me now, even though I can't do those things. It's mostly fund me, right? It's mostly like give me venture capital so I can build this theory that I have. And I, you know, knowing what I know, I knew that it was never going to work. So when I got into Bitcoin, I liked this. Number one, the simplicity of it is, once, you know, okay, it's not at first hand, like Michael Saylor described it as a monetary network and like compared it to like, I guess, like, you know, being able to own a piece of the internet, or you know, Facebook is a social network, Apple is a mobile network, and Bitcoin is a money network. And I knew obviously Apple, Facebook, and such companies, whilst being centralized, they're very big. They have lots of customers, and there's just a lot of usage. So I saw the parallel there with Bitcoin. That's what dragged me into it. And then when like I start looking at Ethereum or Polkadot, and it's like bridging across different blockchains and sharding and blah, 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 I'm like, I don't understand any of this shit. Like, I want to keep Bitcoin. Sounds good because it's simple, 21 million. I get the money thing, the hard money. I did my thesis on silver at university. So I owned some silver for a bit. It was a terrible investment, but I learned about hard money a little bit. I'd completely forgotten about it by the time I got into Bitcoin, but it helped once I refreshed. So I like the simplicity, and I actually, I owned shitcoins for a little bit, but I just bought them as like a basket of, because I got orange pilled by Michael Saylor on Raoul Pal Real Vision video. Raoul Pal's a good communicator and stuff. And at the time he's like shilling Bitcoin as like the next huge. It was before he went 95 Ethereum and 5 Bitcoin, whatever. He was like, he had 20% as a basket. He like treated it as a VC investment, and it's 20% of a basket of all different shit coins. He doesn't care about which ones. He just in case, some of them go up. So I had that for like 3 weeks. And then I was like, I can't keep track of like 19 different prices every day and stuff. So I just sold them all again and went just back to Bitcoin. And I held a little bit of Ethereum for a little while longer, but only because I was waiting for the right time to flip it back. But what I was trying to say is I'm not, I can't relate. Well, I understand that this is a fact, but I can't relate to the getting attracted by the marketing of like the promises that some other crypto is better, faster, stronger, is going to do something. If it's not doing it now, I'm skeptical.
Yeah. I just wanted to say I used to hold Ethereum until the DAO hack and until the fork. This is where I saw it's not very much different from, for example, the Liberty Reserve or eGold, like the Bitcoin predecessors that were centralized. But then, back to like my shitcoin journey, I wasn't ever seduced with like ICOs or like sleek marketing type of coins, but more with like stuff like Monero and Litecoin, and these like not pre-mined, not really marketing heavy, seemed to have like solid tech development and such, especially Monero. But in the end I found out Bitcoin is very much going to stand on its own feet, and we don't need these basically. And there's this concept of shelling point, like there's one standard for communication protocols, like we've got lingua franca, like it used to be French, Spanish, Latin, now it's English. We've got like QWERTY keyboards, we've got USB ports and such, and we've got the same for money. It used to be gold and silver, now it's US dollars, and it's going to be Bitcoin, and doesn't make sense that we should go to this multi-currency future, because Bitcoin has everything it needs, and Bitcoin is evolving. Like that's what most shitcoiners are not willing to admit, that Bitcoin evolves at quite a fast pace if you consider that it's necessarily conservative. But even though it's conservative, it made huge developments over the past 13 years.
Yeah, I think I'd like to highlight, actually, you wrote a piece. My listeners won't know this yet because I haven't actually like made it public, but I'm now the managing director of BTC Times, and you wrote that piece of why keeping up with Bitcoin is a full-time job, and you did an excellent job at articulating and showing how much development there is in Bitcoin, and sort of like negating this idea that Bitcoin is old, slow, no one wants to change it, etc. I think that I would say that changes made to Bitcoin are well reasoned, very well thought out, and very solidly executed, so they don't break anything. There's I would maybe argue very little to no trade-offs when you add a feature to Bitcoin, whereas like when you add a feature to a shitcoin has a certain feature because it trades off something that Bitcoin isn't willing to trade off, whether it's like security, decentralization, or whatever else. Shitcoins are trading off some things to add more complexity and features, whereas Bitcoin is not willing to do that. But it is possible to make upgrades and changes, it's more additions to the protocol without necessarily having the trade-offs that other shitcoins accept.
Yeah, that's right. And it's good you mentioned the trade-offs, because as I was researching Taproot and like the future iterations of Taproot, that's what actually, I believe it's Peter Wheeler, mentions that the current iteration of Taproot is actually stripped down of all the new research and stuff that we don't understand the trade-offs of yet. Even though it would be very convenient and very exciting to have stuff like cross-input signature aggregation, CISA, we still don't understand the full trade-offs of that. So it's going to take a few more years before we got cheap coin joins that would be basically much cheaper than simple spends, which is like what I'm very excited about, and people like Matt Odell are excited about it and such. But it's not a part of this iteration of Taproot because there are unknown trade-offs. Maybe there are no trade-offs, but we still don't know properly. So
we don't have a marketing team, so there's nobody to say like, oh, we need to ignore the fact that we don't know if there's going to be a trade-off for selling this ideal and selling this action, because otherwise if we admit that, you know, the vaccine manufacturers aren't saying, as an example, like, oh, you might die from taking the vaccine, right? Even though that's a possibility, right? But Bitcoin isn't worried about marketing Bitcoin and only showing one side or only showing the potential pros. We want to make sure we don't break it. Whereas like Ethereum, as an example, excuse me, you know, you'll see Vitalik proposing something magical that changing this, that, or the other, but there isn't a lot of discussion around like what the trade-offs of that are. And I think the reason why people go for crypto as opposed to Bitcoin is because they're sold this. They don't understand, first of all, trade-offs, because they don't understand the differences and similarities between the cryptocurrencies. And so they're sold this thing that's like, it's Bitcoin plus faster transactions and everything else, and no minuses. It's still, because the marketing teams or however it's sold are still telling you that it's decentralized, but it's not as decentralized as Bitcoin or decentralized at all. It's a lie. That's why, like, I guess we say it's a scam, and people don't realize this.
Bitcoin moves slow and breaks nothing, and shitcoins have to move fast and break. Like the first thing they break is the decentralized consensus usually, and the precedent of not introducing some changes that would require hard forks and such. That's like 5 years ago why I became skeptical with Ethereum, because I saw this mentality that you could just shove down everybody's throats the latest cool change, latest cool update in form of hard fork, and Ethereum made like 10 hard forks to this date or something, and they regularly forget about their difficulty bomb, and it's just such a clusterfuck. It's unbelievable.
Difficulty bomb's almost like the debt ceiling.
Yeah. That's a good
just
analogy.
Always push it back. Anyway, so you mentioned coin joining. I think this leads us nicely to talking a little bit about Trezor, what you do there, perhaps, and then talking about Trezor itself and some of the new features that are going to come out. But tell us what you do for Trezor.
Sure. So my official title is brand ambassador for Trezor, and like my sort of unofficial title is Bitcoin ambassador at Trezor, because to properly represent like the values and mission of Trezor, you need to understand basically why Bitcoin matters, why you should take it seriously, why holding your coins at an exchange is a heresy basically, and how it all works and why it all matters basically. So and from a more like down-to-earth perspective, what I do is I write articles for Bitcoin Magazine, where I explain, for example, I explained Shamir backup and how it works with inheritance planning, and why you should care about what happens to your Bitcoin if you die or if something happens to you. That's often quite neglected. Another like field of articles I like to explore is Bitcoin as global non-state money, and what are the consequences of that if Bitcoin truly is the global non-state money, how we are going to work with Bitcoin, because not every one of us can own their own UTXO, so we need these further layers. What it means in terms of not necessarily price, but more like a purchasing power of Bitcoin, because price in fiat terms won't matter in a few years.
Yep.
It doesn't matter for people from Lebanon. Like, it doesn't matter if Bitcoin is making new all-time highs, if the currency is collapsing, right?
Yeah.
And this is basically going to happen to all the fiat currencies, but people don't just don't see it yet and aren't willing to admit that. So,
and just to clarify on that point, on like the fiat price doesn't matter, because I think this was something I was like, I didn't get the profundity of until recently. Is that, am I right in saying it's because what matters ultimately is the purchasing power of that Bitcoin, is the goods and services that you can acquire, not the fiat amount?
Yeah. That's exactly right, because it's hard for us to understand.
People tie fiat and purchasing power together. More fiat, more purchasing power, and they don't understand that that's not the case always, right?
No. Purchasing power means what your 1,000 sats are going to buy you now and in the future, and this is going to go up major time, and it won't matter necessarily how much Bitcoin is worth in fiat currencies, because maybe people won't be willing to sell Bitcoin for fiat currencies anymore. I'm not sure who's willing to sell Bitcoin in Lebanon for Lebanese pounds, or in Venezuela, or stuff like that, because sooner or later in various fiat currencies there will come a time where fiat won't buy you Bitcoin anymore, and then the fiat price tag doesn't matter anymore, and what matters is what you can actually buy with your Bitcoin.
Yep, perfect. That's a very important point for people to understand that.
And it's useful to have this end game in mind, especially if there's a bear market coming, or if you go through some volatility, like now we are like 40% below the ATH. And you should actually welcome like the drops and the bear markets, because it allows you to make the end game for you and your family that much better, because you can stack more sets for the same amount of fiat currencies, which are going to be worthless in the future. So yeah, that's a huge part of what I'm trying to do here at Trezor, to explain why it all matters and why it's not just like you can just deposit your dollars at Coinbase, buy some multiple shitcoins that they recommend or some influencers recommend, sell it in a year, pay your taxes, and just go about your life. Bitcoin for me is savings. It's what the fiat currencies cannot do anymore. You cannot save your purchasing power in fiat currencies anymore, because the interest rates are usually lower than the inflation rate, especially in the past 2 years. So what Bitcoin allows you is to be quite conservative with your money, to just put away part of your earnings, part of your wealth, safeguard it for yourself in Trezor with Shamir backup setup and everything, and sort of like forget about it and do it like every month. Just save a few percent of your earnings in Bitcoin, and there is no counterparty failure risk, and there is no risk of being diluted by either by the company, like Tesla shares got diluted and such, or by the monetary policy, basically. So it's a tough task to explain to people why Bitcoin is actually very conservative and why they should have this conservative mentality. that it's not about fast gains, it's not about making more fiat, it's about just preserving your purchasing power as in as secure and private manner as possible.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, what I would say is, and especially if your superiors are listening, that they've picked the right man for the job. I think you do. Just from my interaction with you here and reading your article, my mom is into Bitcoin as well, and she helps me do research for this podcast as a way of learning it. She wants to do it to help her understand and learn more. She's like starting to try and learn about the tech, and she read your article as part of her research to give me some notes, and she said it was amazing, and she got lots of new resources to check out and things to learn about that she didn't understand. So again, I would highly recommend people go and check out your article in BTC Times and also your writing in Bitcoin Magazine. In terms of, so I'm getting an impression, and I think everyone is, like, that you're not for shitcoins and that Trezor is a Bitcoin first company. But one of the things, so Trezor was the first hardware wallet. Actually, I lied. I got a ledger first, and then I immediately, once it was delivered, read about the hack, the data breach that they had. And then I was like, they handled it so terribly that I just got rid of my ledger, and I got a Trezor. But then as I learned more about Bitcoin and shitcoins, and I was like, I wondered why Trezor. So there's this push in Bitcoin land for like, use Bitcoin only wallets because it's better. They're not focusing on shitcoins, and so there's less likely to be like a security issue or a bug in the wallet due to some shitcoin support. And I was wondering, like, as I got to know Trezor more and more, like, the people there seem to be very aligned and focused on Bitcoin, yet the wallet supports a lot of other coins as well. And then I heard you explain how that all works on the Bit Refill podcast, and I was just wondering if you could talk about that as well, because the way you guys support shitcoins isn't necessarily a resource drain on Trezor, right?
Yeah, that's right. So like how the altcoin integrations work is the community basically has to do their own pull request. We have the guidelines. We of course check like the integrity of the pull request, and then we integrate it in the latest firmware. But the most work to be done is on the part of the community. So if some altcoin community wants to integrate, they have to do their job. And sometimes like funny things happen, like they break basically the compatibility. That has happened with some altcoin like half a year ago, and we reached out to them and they basically didn't care. It was some dying altcoin.
You mean as in they make a change and then it breaks their own coin's compatibility with the wallet? Yes. And then they can't use it anymore, and they don't. Okay, got it.
That sometimes happens.
Yeah. Fair.
Regarding the potential attack surface of altcoins, like funny thing is the same attack surface is possible with Bitcoin testnet. This is what like this vulnerability has been in Ledger, their Bitcoin application as well, due to Bitcoin testnet being supported, and it has been also in Coldcard because they also support Bitcoin testnet. So this is quite a big like potential attack vector, but we are aware of it and everybody's aware of it, and it has been patched. Yeah.
Cool.
And when you check out actually like Trezor contributions to Bitcoin, you can find quite a lot of bips that Stick and Slash made over the years. Shamir backup has been like the Shamir scheme has been readjusted to like Bitcoin security in form of Shamir backup that has been done by Trezor, and it's an open standard, and I believe one or two other hardware wallets are also supporting it. So, and Taproot was implemented like on day one in here, and we are actively working on implementing CoinJoin on top of Taproot. So the focus here of our developers is on Bitcoin. It's like you say, it's a Bitcoin first company. And like, as I understand the support for altcoins and being open to this altcoiner community is as follows. I believe in the end people are going to become Bitcoiners. It can take them several years to do so. I'm quite happy, like Trezor supported Litecoin all these years ago when I still was like a Litecoiner and just took it seriously. Because I already had the device in my hand, and when I became a Bitcoiner, it was simple for me to just readjust. And I really believe Trezor is the best hardware wallet out there because it's fully open source. It has like the longest track record. We have like the bug bounty program and such. We are working on the open source secure element. So having the best-in-class security, even for people that are not 100% Bitcoiners, is still providing a valuable service, and these people are going to become Bitcoiners in the end. So it's not like something hypocritical, because we are providing the security. What we actually sell to people is reliable security. And these people are going to be aligned value-wise with us in the end, because bear markets create Bitcoiners.
Yeah.
It's easy to be a shitcoiner in the bull market in the past 2 years, but these JPEGs are going to zero. These like DeFi coins are going to like minus 99% and such, and this is what creates Bitcoiners in the end.
Yeah, agreed. It's almost like, I guess you could say, like almost a Trojan horse that, like you said, somebody might use it for whatever Litecoin, but then when they eventually become a Bitcoiner, they already have a Trezor, and then they'll just use that, which is, and you're providing, as you said, good security, a long history, and aligned ethos with Bitcoin. And I guess it's also like aligns with like sort of free market libertarian, that you allow other people to do whatever they want if they want to, being open source. You know, you're not saying to someone, oh, even if you do it yourself, you can't build Litecoin support. You can. You guys just focus on what you want.
Sure. But then again, I completely see why some manufacturers go with just Bitcoin only devices. That's totally fine. And I actually value like their inputs and their writings and thoughts and such.
Yeah.
There's part of pragmatism in like Trezor's approach, and partially not limiting like our customer base and potential future Bitcoiners to only those that actually see the value just in Bitcoin for now. Because the thing is, and I don't want to like shit on the competition and such, but if you check out like Ledger's communication, it's all about Web3 and NFTs basically. There's not much Bitcoin content there.
Yeah.
So if we didn't like support altcoins, people would have just basically one choice, just to go to Ledger, and they would be constantly bombarded with this content. We have the support for altcoins, so many altcoiners opt to buy Trezor, for example, because it's fully open source.
Yep.
And they get the exposure to like Bitcoin narrative and why Bitcoin matters, and when we write about like the crypto industry at large, we usually point out that Bitcoin is what usually survives in the end, and why that is the case and such. So like it's fine to be like a Bitcoin maximalist, even product wise, but it doesn't work on the like educational and outreach level as much, because you just focus on those that already you are speaking to the core, kind of thing.
That's a fantastic point, and actually you've shifted my mindset, because I own a Trezor and I've owned a Ledger before and no longer, and then I was slowly like buying more Bitcoin only devices because I was like Bitcoin maximalist hardware and everything, but I hadn't thought about the angle that you've just posed, that if like we don't, if we don't have a Trezor, then there's a potential for everyone to end up on Ledger or some other hardware wallet that's I guess got a wider reach, not so narrow, like preaching to the choir reach. So that's a fantastic point. Well,
and that said, I recommend Stefan Livera's interview with Ledger Bitcoin app developer, and he seems like a solid Bitcoin guy. Like I don't want to criticize Ledger that much because they do a lot of good stuff, and I really enjoyed this interview, learned a lot about PSBT and hardware wallets and output descriptors and such. It's episode 337. It came out just recently.
Cool. Well, I put that in the show. 337. I put that in the show notes. Look, I wanted to talk to you about like coin joining, pay joining, Taproot. But I have a stop in a little bit, and I hopefully maybe one day we can do a round 2 with you, because I've got lots of notes of other stuff that I haven't talked about, and perhaps we can go back and like I can ask you about those things, and we can dig deeper into some topics. And maybe since we know that like it's a flowing conversation, we can do a super pod and leave some time. But because I really want to, the one thing I'm really interested selfishly to ask you is like how you handle everything. Because I'll just give you a brief. So, just a brief overview of where I'm at. So I'm doing this podcast. I want to turn This Is Bitcoin into. I want to create a really good Bitcoin resource website with original, but also just the best content that's made by other people, so that it's a one-stop shop. Hopefully present it in a way that like people can find the information they want really easily. But yeah, so I have my own thing going with This Is Bitcoin and the podcast. Then I'm working with Brains and Slush Pool a few hours a day, doing some marketing, writing and stuff. And then now I have BTC Times as well. And I know you do a bunch of stuff, like you do your own podcast, you write books, you're an ambassador for Trezor, you're going on other people's podcasts, you're writing articles. Like, can you take me through, well, maybe we can address this from 2 angles. Like, can you take me through a typical day of yours? Like, how do you organize yourself to achieve so much? Because I would say I'm pretty disorganized in general. So I'd like to learn from people who are very productive and how they do things. And just generally ethos, like how do you approach juggling all these different balls, and then what does a typical day look like for you?
All right. Good topic. So a typical day is like, and now it's going to sound like I brag, because in January I usually have a more high-powered kind of month. So right now it's like I wake up at 6:30 a.m. I do my workouts. Right now I'm doing some pull-up program at home. I have got a pull-up bar at home, highly recommend it. Then I take my kids to school or kindergarten. Right now I don't usually have a breakfast. I'm doing an intermittent fasting kind of thing. When I go to the office, I use the public transport, so I listen to podcasts on the way. Usually Stefan Livera or Tales from the Crypt or Seyfedin or Bitcoin Rapid Fire, What's Bitten, and these high quality podcasts. In the office I usually work on some articles or preparing for like podcast appearances and such. Right now I'm in the process of building like Satoshi Labs podcasting studio, so that's a big project I'm trying to handle right now. And on my way back home, I listen to more Bitcoin podcasts, of course. And in the evening, I usually, apart from being with my family, with kids, so once the kids go to bed after 10 p.m., I usually do some stuff on like my private projects, which is the Czech Bitcoin podcast, my website, my eShop, and like some accounting and such. And usually I go to sleep at between 11 p.m. and midnight.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. That's an awesome day.
Like what helped a lot is having a full-time job that's focused just on Bitcoin and on producing this Bitcoin content, because it's very synergistic. Like what I do for Satoshi Labs helps me a lot with producing the Czech content, and I always got like a lot of topics to talk about when it comes to Bitcoin or economics and such, so I don't have to prepare as much for being at some conference or talking with some podcast guest and such. When I used to work for corporations in like a food industry, it was actually much tougher to focus on like studying Bitcoin and creating Bitcoin content. It's good to have a Bitcoin job to, have this kind of a higher volume of output. Yeah.
Agreed. Yeah. Everything, when you're, I guess, focusing on Bitcoin, then every little bit that you do anywhere feeds into the other bit and helps you. And like you said, like, you're already, when you go to a conference, you're so well versed from spending all this time learning and immersed that you don't have to prepare as much, which is, it's awesome. It's almost like compounding your work.
That's it. It's a compound effect. Yeah.
Cool.
And awesome. Like maybe one, I like to recommend books like all the time, because that's where I learn a lot of stuff from. So totally Bitcoin unrelated, but what has kicked me to a higher level of productivity was one particular book. It's by David Goggins. It's called Can't Hurt Me. You know that?
Yep. Yeah, I've listened to almost all of it. I also like Jocko Willink's.
Jocko Willink, yeah.
He has what is Discipline Equals Freedom Field Manual.
Yeah.
Have you read that?
Yeah. I've read the other book. What's it called?
He's got Extreme Ownership.
Extreme Ownership. Yeah.
Yeah, that's also good.
These two books, I've read them like 13 months ago, like in December 2020. I have no words. I don't like the term like motivational speech or anything, but these are real people talking about like real lives, and why like wasting time is just wasting your life, and you should really strive to do best and do what fulfills you, of course, because then you are in this flow mode, everything is synergistic. So yeah, these two books I heavily recommend.
Yeah, I mean, talking about scarcity and limited supply assets and stuff, like time is the most scarce asset that we have, right? So being purposeful with what you're doing and doing something that you love is a big life hack, you could call it.
Yeah. And I don't watch football. Like many Czechs waste such amount of time on football.
I mean, there's such a difference. I used to be a humongous football fan, and just all sorts of other stuff, like, spending habits were so, I call it like I tweeted the other day, somebody else has tweeted this before, but it's like the before Bitcoin and after Bitcoin. Like, there's so much more focus on a few things that are important, and everything else has fallen by the wayside.
Yeah, that's right.
Amazing.
I have the same approach, for example, in my diet. Like I'm heavily carnivore leaning, which is basically just a pure elimination diet where you just eliminate all the crap and you end up with animal-based, basically. And I've got the same approach with exercise. Just doing what's the most effective, with reading, listening to podcasts and such. Yeah.
I am 5 days into a carnivore experiment right now, and the first 2 times, so I have like I have like chronic stomach issues that are autoimmune related. So trying different diets and stuff has just been an experiment to see what works, what doesn't. I've never managed to do carnivore for more than like 24 hours just because it had like very bad impact. And I heard this is possible, but I keep trying. This is the 3rd time I'm trying it, and I'm 5 days into it. And what I will say is remarkable is sometimes like it's a struggle. I just don't want to eat because I'm like, I just don't want to eat another piece of meat. But I don't have the craving to eat anything else. I'm okay not eating for much longer periods of time than I am when I'm eating, carbs, pizza, chocolate, and other stuff in my diet. So that's been the most remarkable thing. It's just like the hunger. It's like if I don't eat for 16 hours because I don't feel like it, I'm not hungry to eat. I'm basically eating like I can see how you can move to a 1 meal a day type of schedule eating carnivore. So I'm gonna keep it going as long as I feel okay.
Do check out Paul Saladino. His book Carnivore Code is what convinced me to try it. He's got podcasts. He's active on Twitter and such. And like the thing about carnivorism is it's not just meat. You can eat like eggs,
cheese, right?
Dairy, if you don't have a problem with that. And broth.
Milk. I'm doing milk.
Broth
I'm doing some beef. Bone broth. All of that. Safe Dean has a great page on his website, safedean.com/meat. If you've ever read that. It's really good. I
have to check it out.
So he has about becoming carnivore and tips on, even like what he uses to cook meat, like different meat oven things and stuff. So recommend that people check that out. And I'll check this Paul Saladino book out as well. I hadn't heard of it. But it's been a pleasure talking to you. I wish I had more time to carry on and dig deeper into some topics, but I really, really, really appreciate you reaching out to me and suggesting that we do a podcast together. I've gotten to know you a little bit better, which is awesome. I love making new friends and connections in Bitcoin, and I will be coming to Prague sometime this year as well. I'll be at Bitcoin 2022, I think. Are you going to be there?
Yeah, I should be done.
So hopefully we get to meet in real life. When I went to El Salvador, I met some of the Trezor guys and girls. They were in the booth next to us. It's just amazing to meet Bitcoiners and hang out in real life. So hopefully we can do it soon. And thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you. I've had a lot of fun with this.